I'm here to tell my story about my experience with my ex-husband about domestic violence to help other people. You can get out of it. It's tough, but you have to listen to what's inside. That's why they call it women's intuition. It happened fast. He was a former New York police officer, and I married here in Arizona, and he just did all the right things I'd never had. And I think a lot of it goes back to I wasn't a badge bunny. I had gone through the law enforcement academy, and not having a father and a male figure in my life, I think I felt safe. And I married him quickly, just a few months after I met him. And I didn't do my homework. I didn't look, because the wife prior to me died by suicide, and he was investigated for her death. And that was like the year prior to our having met. A week after we were married, I was diagnosed with melanoma. And they said that you're going to be like dead in 3 months. And that stopped me in my tracks. So I married in February. By May 15, I was operated on. And they took 4 inches out of my side down to the bone. And I had to just lay still and get better and take care of me. And that's when I saw all the writing on the wall of what he was up to. And he'd been calling a deputy, saying that I was suicidal, and the deputy would not come out to the house because the deputy did not believe him. And, quote, the deputy said, I wouldn't tell him, being my ex, the deputy wouldn't tell him what he wanted to hear. And I found out a lot of things afterwards, but it was more verbal, like in your head abuse, the picking, and it wasn't physical except in the bedroom. And I've never told this. I barely told my best friend the other day. Being handcuffed, being searched, it's all about control. My mouth being covered until I would go to take a breath, and he would let me breathe. And then he would say, if I was ever with another man, that he would kill me. And then he'd say, do you understand? And I'd say yes. And then he would say, why did it take you so long to answer? And kind of the icing on the cake, so a very small window there because I was operating on 515, and I was able to I was worried about the dogs. All I wanted was my dogs. On May 28th, I was able to get a third round of deputies to go in and serve him. They would not, the other 2 times the police officers were out, they would not give him the signed order by the judge because he got them, the other law enforcement officers, on his side. So the last time the deputy came out, prior to that, the deputy said, you basically have 2 choices. You either go to a shelter or you stay here another night. And he had control of my money and everything because I'd just been operated on. He had all the authorizations and everything if something happened to me. And because I couldn't take my dogs to the shelter, I chose to stay another night. So that night, there was a few days that I was medicated because I had a major surgery, 4 inches taken down out of my side down to the bone. And my gun disappears. So that night in bed, in an open hand, and he offers me his gun. And he says, if you're so afraid of me, why don't you take this? And I had put the pieces together, and I knew the wife before me at that time had died by suicide, and he was investigated. And so I said to him, if you think that I'm stupid enough to put my fingerprints on your gun, I said, you have the wrong girl. And if you didn't kill the wife before me, you drove her to it. And that's where I had I left the back door open, unlocked, so I could get out. He knew when I had taken the dog's beds to court to get the order, but he also knew that the order was in the car because in front of the deputy, I couldn't get the deputy to serve him. So now he knew that I've got a signed order by the judge. So I finally got a sergeant and a third round of deputies over a period of a couple days. And everything kind of had to go off without a hitch because it was set up for them to come in and get him to stand aside and me to get the dogs and get my things and get out. He had been following me that morning. I could feel like somebody was following me. And because I was the director of marketing, I had a few things to do. And then I had run by my office and spread everything out and put my laptop there and spread everything out. It looked like I was working. Well, he was behind me the whole time. And that was verified by some people in the office. So I put everything on my desk, and then I went to meet the sheriff's department at the substation. And then they eventually came and then had me stay there. And then they had 2 officers go to the house and make him stand aside. And I didn't want anything. I just wanted the officers recording. What I'm taking is like dog bed, dog bowl, dog blanket. And I took just what was mine. And he reached out and he said, my mother's ring, because how he proposed to me is he had slipped his dead mother's ring that meant so much to him on my hand in the middle of the night to see if it fit. So he totally sucked me in. There's no other way to put it. So he said in front of the deputies, he said, my mother's ring. And so I had his mother's ring and my wedding band. So the deputy said, you cannot take any personal property from her. And I just took it off my hand. I handed it to the deputy and I said, I don't want anything of his. But it's really interesting. After I left, so he got to stay in the house. Rent was paid 2 months in advance. I left and had to go make payment arrangements, find another place to live. I had a lot of PTSD. I wouldn't hug anybody, touch anybody, anything like that. I changed everything about myself. The side of the bed I slept on, because he knew everything. He knew all my passwords. I was all in when I got married to him.
Supposed to be.
That's, I told him everything. But there's something kind of called the dark night of the soul, but that's for another day. I was awake for a long time. I used to sit out in the dark in Sedona. Of course, it's beautiful. And not depressed, but just kind of in a state of shock and what to do next. And I remember the Drew Peterson trial. That was a sergeant in Clark County or Cook County. And that trial was because my best friend and I started trying to put all the prior wives of my ex, we can't even fit them into a timeline. There were so many. And in a moment of despair, I called the district attorney in Clark County. And it was Glasgow was the one, but then there was an assistant prosecuting attorney. His name is John Connor. And I called and I left a message and I said, hi, my name is Julie Burnett. I married a former New York police officer who's just like a Drew Peterson type. How did Kathleen Savio's family keep the story in the media? And a month later, I get this call. And he says, this is John Connor, the assistant prosecuting attorney of the Drew Peterson trial. And I said, how did Kathleen Savio's family keep the Kathleen's memory or her story in the news? And this was before Stacy Peterson went missing, his fourth wife. And John says, well, they didn't. They were afraid of defamation of character. So they dropped out of the media. But then when Stacy went missing, John said, and John's a judge now in Chicago area. He's a circuit judge, I think. And John had said that they didn't until Stacy went missing. That's when Kathleen Savio family came back to the media. And then that's when they were able to get her body exhumed. And then that's when they were able to get Joe for murder. But it was interesting because John and I spoke for about 45 minutes. And what he said to me was, he said, Julie, what saved your life is you told everyone. And I had other police officers, because I was director of marketing in a small high tourist town. I had like my rangers. They knew the back way to my office. I parked underground. They all had my back. I actually had a sergeant that used to come by the house and check to make sure I was okay, because I was just had the dogs and I was alone and in a house. I had no furniture. The dogs had more beds. I slept on the floor with the dogs in front of the fireplace. And just, so he pretty much fled Sedona. Someone overheard him at the post office that he sold his car, was moving to another state. And they ran and came and told me. And the lady that had married us had called me. And she said, guess what he did? And I said, what? She goes, he married again. And I just said, I hope she lives to tell. It's about, I forget which one it is, a psychopath or sociopath. It's about image and money. Like the deputy kept saying to me, well, like they didn't have a motive. And well, when we went back to John Connor also said, why didn't the police department call you in? And I said, I don't know why. You know, he said, she said, his word against mine. And it was about his image, because I had made my boss a lot of money marketing his shops and his restaurants. And my ex, he snapped his business card, his real estate business card, in front of me one day, and he says, he like snapped it on the table, and he says, I want the respect that you give when you say I work for so-and-so. And I said, well, when you pay me as much as so-and-so, you can have it. But it was all about the way he wanted to appear to other people. And little did I know, he went back to a woman before me, another one, and she was actually at our house. But because I was always working until I got the melanoma saved my life. It just stopped me in my tracks. It's like, thank God I got melanoma, because I probably wouldn't be here. But it is about image, and that's what feeds him. He'd been on dating sites. I found out later. And after I had left, I finally received some of my belongings back. Because when the lease expired, and the house we rented was actually from a local newspaper owner, he had been through every box of my belongings. I'm sure he made copies, whatever. And he had taped them up neatly. So I received a call from the landlord, said, "You're on the lease. We're going to give you," he was very, very upset that I was going to get half the deposit back. So the sheriffs didn't want me going there alone, but he managed to get the sheriff's permission to leave. So as he's leaving, I'm coming because I passed him on the highway. I see him go by. Every box of my belongings was neatly packed up with new tape. And he'd been through everything, but he had to make it look to this landlord that this was. So I took the belongings home to my place that I had rented, and my dog cowered down on the ground. And this friend of mine had helped me move, and the dog cowered down on the ground, and my dog had bit my ex-husband, just lacerated his hand. So he did something to my dog to do that. So my dog, it was the scent of my ex-husband on my belongings that the dog cowered. And so I told the guy that helped me move, I said, "I want you to go home and I want you to bathe, come back so you don't smell like any of the stuff we moved, and see if my dog acts the same way." My dog didn't. So I left everything in the garage. So I started bringing up things one by one. It's like, oh, wow, I got to have a toaster. So I didn't have anything. Plug in the toaster, it starts on fire. Oh, there's sheets, because I knew the sheets were on the bed. Go to dump them in the washer, pill bottles fall out. He didn't even know his medication. There was like migraine medicine and a nausea medicine. He had messed with every single thing of my belongings to mess with my head as I opened every box.
That's deep.
But they took his name. The wife before me, her family, actually, there was a lot of similarities to it. And like I said, I didn't do my homework. Is that she was cremated and they took his last name away from her. And that one sergeant that used to show up after I moved and check on me and make sure I was okay he said, you need to try to get the gun out of evidence because there's other tests that can be done and everything. Because they had ruled her death as suicide, even though he was investigated. There was a note, but, you'll write a note. If somebody holds a gun to you, you'll write a note that says anything. But the picking would probably have driven her to it as well. And there was another woman, and I thought it was just the wife before me, but the sheriff detective clarified it for me because I told him this story. So there was another woman before the wife just before me whom he spun it around and had her arrested for domestic violence. So he was the victim. He knew exactly what he was doing. But he wasn't that smart. He was a psychopath, sociopath. It was about image, and it was about, he tried to establish, my mom and I had been estranged, hadn't spoken for many, many years. He sent my mother a Mother's Day card and signed my name to it and had established a relationship behind my back with my mom. And I'm an only child. And because what bothered the deputy is, we need to find out, is there a life insurance policy or something like that? But I'm an only child, and my mother was fairly well off, and that's the only reason I could think that he would have established that relationship with her behind my back. Was if something happens to me, then he's married to me, and I'm the only child. He stems to gain from that. And what's interesting is when you look into backgrounds and investigations, and when someone runs a background on you, et cetera, and everything. So he's placed his real estate license inactive, and he's gone back to being a guard. I don't know if it's a private guard or a guard in corrections. He's gone back to law enforcement in another state. I keep an eye on him, sporting a pretty nice car. But I didn't want, the judge asked me, because he was able to get the protection order quashed, because I didn't get to say anything. And then he got to tell the judge about how he was a police officer and he was a motorcycle police officer in New York State. And I didn't get to say anything. And he lied. The lies that he told were just, everything was a lie. And so the judge had asked me in the courtroom, he says, "What do you want?" And I said, "I want my last name back. That's all I want." That's all I got. And my dogs. Well, one, if something's too good to be true, it usually is. But you know, I still believe in love. I don't really date. I'll never marry a police officer. That's for sure. And I was trained. And that's the thing. I never thought I would find myself in that position where I had to have that safe plan, where I had to have that. And he'd been in my phone and deleted while I was medicated. When I came up from the surgery, he'd been in my phone and he had deleted everybody in my phone that could attribute to my state of mind. Like I had a friend that had like 25 testicular cancer surgeries. And he beat it. And Mark and I used to talk all the time. 6 months after I had left and we got divorced, I get this text message and it says, "Hey, I'm back in town." And I said, "Who is this?" And he says, "Julie, it's Mark." Anyone that could attribute during that time to my state of mind, it goes to my credibility, obviously because I speak on suicide. It would be, he said, "Why would you believe me?" But the thing is, if I was suicidal, why, and you take my gun away from me because you're afraid that I'm going to harm myself, why would you hand me yours? Because then it's my prints are on it. I killed myself with your gun. It's just, so I think if they threaten and this just isn't just male, female, intimate partner violence, any type of couple, if they threaten your dog or they threaten your children, the verbal abuse is actually worse than the physical because of the picking and somebody hits you, it hurts for a day and it goes away. But the mind game and I think what contributed to it a lot was my lack of self-worth issues, is that I had a lot of lack of self-worth issues. So I believed it, or I was easier to beat down. I think when you listen to you get that feeling and but I know from my experience speaking and writing on suicide, it's a very different, I was in fight or flight mode. I was on autopilot. I don't even know how I was up and around with my side. I couldn't drive or anything being operated on. Is that it's easier to fight for your life than it is to fight for every day. You have the right to take your own life, but you don't have the right to take someone else's. And when someone's trying to take your life, it's a whole different ballgame. There was no marks between gagging me with a scarf, with slapping a handcuff up on my arm and pulling me up on the wall and spreading me against the wall and searching me, because that's the only way that he could become aroused, was that control. And to gag me with a scarf, there was one time he was, 220 pounds, 240 pounds, and then he had hit me full on with his hand across the face. And I almost kind of laughed because I was so shocked. That was like my defense mechanism, was to laugh. And obviously it wasn't funny, but it was his word against mine. And those things were so personal. I've never told those people. When I look back, when I was married in 1989, the first time, I married a man, wasn't a police officer. 6 months after I married him, he became insanely jealous. Just crazy jealous, accusing me of things. And I was walking to work, I worked for the state of California for years. And I walked across the sidewalk, and he showed up in a car and tried to shove me in the car and accuse me of like going to hotel. And I was like near the Tenderloin district in San Francisco. I'm like, oh yeah, right. I was doubling back to go to McDonald's for a biscuit that morning. And he threw me through, it was kind of like an accident. And I fell and cut my head through a plate glass window. And I divorced him. And immediately, and you would have thought I would have learned the first time. Now I see the signs. There are signs. I dated one man that said, he was sitting in the chair and said, "Make me a drink." I was out that door so fast. I mean, I was gone. But so there are, but I think Mike said, he picked me. I think I know how, when I moved to Arizona, because we had too many things in common. We'd both worked for United Parcel Service. We'd both been in HR. We'd both been through the law enforcement academy. I think I know where he may have gotten a hold of my information because I had applied for a rental and he worked at a real estate agent at a real estate agency. I think he picked me because there were too many commonalities. Well, Arizona's been tough on me. 11 years, married, divorced, almost homeless, hungry, domestic violence, melanoma. I've gone through 4 dogs. I've had to put down 4 dogs. I lived 16 places in 11 years. I started journaling, and so now I've become a writer, an investigative writer. My genre, I look for missing people. I've always been an underdog, so I love the underdog. And that's where this has all taken me. So I don't have any regrets. I don't hate him. I just hope that he doesn't hurt someone else or their children or their animal. Or it's hard to explain that part about, he's not that smart. But there's another book that's really interesting. Robbie Ludwig did it. It's called Till Death Do Us Part, The Mind of the Killer Spouse. And they cover Scott Peterson, not Drew Peterson. I don't think Drew's in that one. They cover Scott Peterson that was married. Lacey was pregnant when she washed up there in the Bay Area. It's a really interesting book to look at how they're profiled. You know, I wanted to be a school resource officer when I went through the police academy in 95. And then I look at like, wow, look where that would have gotten me with all the school shootings and everything. So I'm glad that path didn't work out, but I did go to work for the appellate courts and I loved the court system. And so now I'm just kind of found my purpose. So when you know what your purpose is, it makes life a lot easier because there's no doubts of what you're supposed to do every day. And the hard part of that is I was able to do that because I was a director of marketing. So I basically got paid to walk and talk, to promote these shops, these businesses, these restaurants. I spoke to the city council. I spoke to the concierge. That's what I got paid to do. But it's hard because they do alienate you from your family and friends. So you didn't really have anybody to call. You don't have any, and I didn't have any family. And I just had to watch my back. I mean, I still carry 24/7. don't go anywhere. But I'm out in the desert a lot by myself too. But I can't have moms going with me too. The other thing is, you know, I raised another man's children, so I wasn't married to him. But I'm not a mom. So I guess I need to choose my words better, but I'm a little more, I don't like to use the word expendable, but a lot of the things, I'm only a few months away from applying for my private investigator's license now. More for my resume, not for the money. I want to help other people that it's tough. I'd gone to some classes years and years ago, and like a battered women's counseling class, and I sat around and I listened to their stories and how their kids were threatened and what the men had done to them. And I'm like, I don't belong here. And I left. I didn't go back. But in essence, I kind of did belong there. And I really do believe it was the lack of self-worth that allowed him to do, me not believing in me, that allowed him to pick away at me. And I think that's probably the same thing from what I've found out from her friends of the wife before me.